So we are live. How
Okay,
are you, Julia?
I'm just great. Thank you very much, Tony.
I am so excited about today's conversation. As we spoke about earlier, I did your tour back in 2015, and it changed my mind about my time in Paris. And I try to encourage my clients and anyone who goes to Paris that they have to do your tour. As I said, I've always been a fan of Richard Wright, James Baldwin, and Josephine Baker. But after your tour, it just turned my mind on to so many other things that took place in Paris, especially as
Mhm.
a black person, an African American. So to introduce you to the people who are listening here, Julia Browne is our Paris, France expert. She does walking tours called
Walking the Spirit.
Walk in the Spirit, I apologize, in Paris, France. And you was an expat there, right? You're native Canadian?
Well, I was born in Britain, but
Mm-hmm.
my family immigrated to Canada when I was about almost 9 years old. So I grew up in Canada, and then I started living in French-speaking countries. So I eventually, one of those French-speaking countries became France. So I lived there, was married, and had kids, and the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Now you said one of the countries was
Well,
so how did Paris become your favorite?
you know what? I'm the type of person that'll just follow whatever's in my mind, and I'll go. I started out in Montreal, actually,
Mhm.
and I went to Montreal so that I could learn French, so that I could become a flight attendant. But then after a couple of years of that just kind of got old, and an opportunity came up for me to go do a study abroad in the south of France, in a town called Aix-en-Provence. It's just a half an hour from Marseille. And so, of course, I went, and it was a beautiful, Provence. If you've ever been to Provence, I can just smell it as I'm talking about it. So I went to Aix-en-Provence, did my year abroad, and then stayed, because we get that you don't want to go. I didn't want to go back to what I came from. It was just so the lifestyle was so different,
Mhm.
and it was just so. I was in a place that felt like it aligned with me,
Mm.
and so that was the thing. I felt like I'd come home, and I
Mhm.
didn't want to leave. But eventually, I not that I set out to, but I eventually did actually meet a man, and then eventually I ran out of money, so I had to go back to Montreal. And then he came back, so we started another Montreal life again, and then from there came back to France.
Mhm.
So I've always been interested in France, on all things French since I was young, since I don't know, since I was very young. And you don't know where these things come from, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
You kind
there,
of
and I
feel it.
tend to follow what's in my mind, or
Yeah,
what moves me.
yeah, yeah. Um, as you know, I am a travel agent, and I can prepare a trip anywhere in the world. But I have a fascination with Europe countries, and again, I like Paris as well. I don't know why. I think I like the whole culture. I would describe Paris as, um, although the lifestyle is very different, but it reminds me of a bigger New York. So it's not so different from how I live here in the States in terms of how things operate. You know, it's not
Right.
like a small country or small city, anything. It's not so different, but it's different. So tell us about the name. How did you come up with the name of your tour company?
So my tour company is called Walking the Spirit Tours. I'm
Mhm.
about to change it to Walking Spirit Journeys, but that's just because we're transforming. But um, you know what? It just kind of dropped out of the sky. It just came into my mind. I told you I'm very instinctive, and it just came to me one day, Walking the Spirit. And so that's what it was, and it is exactly that, because I had been I didn't set out to do tours. I was studying at the Sorbonne. My professor was an expert in the subject, so I was learning from him. So he had this book called A Street Guide to African Americans in Paris. And I took this book and I walked around from street to street, and lo and behold, Langston Hughes had lived in my neighborhood. And I thought, what? I
Yes.
mean, I would have had to go to New York to get that, right? To get that close.
Yes.
And then with this book, I, discovered that Michael Jackson had, or his sister had performed down the street, and that Richard Wright had lived there, and James Baldwin. And I thought, all these people, all this experience is in one little city, all
Yeah.
rolled in. So I'm walking. So when you're walking, you're actually walking over this and around and through the spirit of all these people. So when the name came to me, I thought, well, yeah, that's about right. That seems about right.
So from 1994 to until now, how have you evolved and how have your tours evolved?
Oh man, that's the evolution comes on so many different levels. I evolved because I was living in a foreign country.
Mhm.
I evolved because I became a mother, which is not something I thought of for myself.
Mhm.
I evolved because I was married and because I was taking on adopting and choosing what part of another culture that suited me better and what I wanted to leave behind, but at the same time leaving what I was ready to cast off. So you're transforming yourself and making yourself into consciously making yourself into something else. Um, and so I've become, I've had different kind of jobs. I didn't expect to do walking tours. I mean, I studied literature, and so doing research for this was kind of natural. And at the time when I started doing this, I was teaching English, but I'd come from the film and television world and photography. So, you just being in a foreign country and not being able to just go out and get a job. I did, but just use the skills that you had and the wiles or the techniques that you had didn't necessarily work in a foreign country. So you had
Mhm.
to find another way. And in France, there's always a plan B, and if that doesn't work, there's plan C. And so you kind of take on us. And I go, I like that way of thinking. There's no right and wrong. If you can make it work, it works, right? And so I just evolved with what the world I was living in. My husband's French.
All right.
So being in a French world made a difference to how my outlook and how I did things. And
Mhm.
yeah, I was ready to put that aside and decide. And then having children, going through the French school system with them,
Mm.
it was like, that's not how we used to do it. And the teachers used to say, like, for example, when the kids used to learn, they never used to learn to write longhand printing. They started writing longhand. And I said to the teacher once, well, they're just not the way they do where I'm from. And she just looked at me and clearly, you Americans, that kind of
Right,
thing.
right.
But, it's just a whole different mindset and mentality. So it just transformed me. And then, doing these tours, which I hadn't really set out to do, but because I loved research and because I loved to learn and I love to share information
Mhm.
coming from the film and television world,
Mhm.
and teaching, I was telling my friends what I was doing. So they said, can you show us? And I said, sure. And I just, took out with my little cue cards and showing them around. And so you just roll with it. You don't have time. You have a family, you've got two jobs. You
Yes,
don't have time to be asking all kinds of questions, right?
yes,
You just move
yes,
it. You
yes.
just move along with it. And it was, like I said, I was in a place that I felt totally aligned with. It was tough. I mean, because the French are funny, I mean, they seem funny
Especially
to
when you're
me.
American.
meaning, let's just say they were the way of looking at life, the way of coming at life was different, and you had to get past the no. Everything was no. Everything you asked for something, no. And but then you learn to get around that no. So it was, I've evolved, I don't even know who's that person back there. I don't know her anymore, but she is part of the person I am glad to be today.
Yeah, yeah. So you touched a bit on how I understand being a mom or a parent and you working and you're being a wife and everything. But outside of that, being in a country that you're not originally from, and I'm going to assume that you didn't know how to speak the language initially.
I did.
You did. Oh,
I
okay.
did.
So
Because
so
I'd lived in Montreal.
okay. So were you scared at any time?
I don't think I even asked myself that. There were no. As far as language goes, I wasn't scared, but I was. Yes, I knew French because I grew up in Canada, in Ontario, where it was a bilingual country, and we're supposed to learn. We learn French at school, technically, and then you
Mm-hmm.
get out. You get out into the French world. You don't know a thing. You have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But so I had the base, and I had the desire to learn, and I wanted to learn French. So that didn't scare me too much. And there was a need in the work that I was looking for English speaking people. So having English was a real benefit. So the kinds of work I could get, again, the first world I went into was the film and television. So I could work in sales and help television companies sell their products to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
or sell documentaries. So it was it was a real benefit. So the fear didn't come in that. Um, there were some moments that made me really afraid, and I remember, I think of one. It was politics in the like the early 1990s. Um, there were some real hardcore neo-Nazi activity going on and far right activity going on. So I could see it around me, I could sense it around me. But I remember getting on the metro one time, and my daughter was probably about a year and a half, and she was in the pram, in the stroller, and at the far end of the wagon, these guys got on who were clearly skinheads, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, should I get off here and then have them follow me onto the platform, or should I just, scoot down to the far end and hope that there's a barrier around me and all kinds of things. So, and because there was the second part of that is that my daughter is very, very, very light skinned, and she's got blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So people used to take me for her babysitter,
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't want, you didn't want that kind of, thing going on. So there were moments like that scared me. And you could just feel there was something in the air. There was an atmosphere that was growing and growing and growing. So that's probably the most feared, that, and then it continues on that way
Right, right.
throughout, yeah. And that it's somewhat coming back. I know, for example, when I do the tours, I have to be very mindful, or I make it a point to be very mindful, not speaking too loud. Because A, in English, B, American sounding, and sometimes there is that sense of foreigners. We don't tolerate. There's a lack of tolerance for foreigners in some places, and especially groups of foreign people of color grouping together. It attract the eye, and I think about it. So I've always got my eye out for people that are standing around who are just kind of eyeballing us or whatever like that. So those are the things you get to be thinking of, sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how does that family feeling and those experience fed into how you did your tours? And so that was a good. I don't have to ask now.
Well, that was
So,
pretty. This stuff, this feeling, this vigilance is within the last year. I didn't really
oh,
think about it too much before. We just stood up there, and I've actually had people. I think that must have been last fall. We were standing on a small street in the fifth district of Paris, on Rue Christine. I remember standing in front of where James Baldwin used to live, and a man came out. He was looked like he's in his 80s or something, and he comes by and he starts yelling at me for speaking English, and
no,
for catering to tourists and stuff like that. And I'm going, and you have to know how to leave them alone, and just how to keep them moving and not respond. But I've seen that a couple of times, actually.
and
So
that
there's
just
a
started
huge
happening
change.
recently.
This is recently. This is in the
Wow.
last year, and it
Oh,
didn't really happen so much before. The other times we had to be careful when there was politics, and there was the thing about the freedom fries and all that. Do you remember that back with George Bush? You
mhm.
had to sort of keep it down. You sort of keep your mouth. You had to keep your voice down that you were American. So you have to just be aware of politics.
Right, right. Okay, so Julie, tell us about your tours. Are they the same? Do they take the same route? How they different? How do you develop them? I know you can customize them,
Mhm.
but what is a typical tour like?
Well, there's a couple of routes. We have a couple of routes. We started out doing walking tours. And so I started that in 1994. As I said, thanks to my professor. And so we walk. I mapped out this tour after doing like all the back end research, building on what my professor had done. So I mapped out, from the starting at for example, the writers, artists, and intellectuals. So
Mm,
that's naturally going to be in the Latin Quarter and the Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is the heart, what's called the brains and the art center of Paris. So we walk, start from the Saint-Michel fountain, and we go along the river. We look behind us and we can see the Notre Dame Cathedral, and we keep walking along the river, and we come to a little tiny street, and we go, here, we're going down this little street, and we start telling the story of the writer Chester Himes. And if you've seen the film A Rage in Harlem, which stars Forrest Whitaker, this Chester Himes, he wrote detective novels, and he made a ton of money. And so we stop in front of his house where he used to live, and in a rooming house. Used to be a rooming house. Now it's like a 4 or 5 star hotel. And we walk along these little streets, and you just telling about what we're seeing, the bookstores, the stores with the comic books, and how that all ties into the story and create the mood of what it was like when these writers were in the 50s and 60s. And then we walk along Saint-André des Arts, and down another little back street, and we talk a little bit about Picasso, because he painted the Guernica down the street down here. And then we'll turn along this little street, Rue Christine, and we'll talk about James Baldwin because he lived here. We'll just stop and talk, and I'll tell you about the cinema, the art house cinemas, and what's the importance of having, what's in this neighborhood, that kind of thing. But then we'll talk about Richard Wright. We'll talk about what's going on between Richard and James Baldwin, and it's lovely because some of these streets are so narrow,
mhm.
and we're like going back into another world. And my goal is to make people feel like we're going back into this world. I try not to overwhelm with too much information because because it's just all there. You just want everybody here to know it. And then we get to the end of the street, and there's another 5-star hotel in the corner, and then I'll tell them that this is where jazz, with the first jazz club in that neighborhood, after we kind of repatriated from the north part of the city. And I'll show them the pictures of the young fellows that used to hang out there, and then we just walk through the district right into the next district, which is Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the 6th district, and we'll go into Bebop, and we'll stand in front of the rooming house where Miles Davis and what's his name, Bud Powell lived, and we'll talk about them. I'll play a little music, and just walk and talk music, look into the cafes, sometimes we dip into, for example, there's a cafe called La Palette, which is on Rue de Seine, which starts at just behind the Louvre, goes all the way up towards Boulevard Saint-Germain. And it's the heart of the arts district. So, and there's art galleries along the street. So we're looking in the art galleries, and then we go into this cafe, into this kind of old, I don't know how long it's been there. It's been there since, I'm going to say, early 1900s. I should know that though, but it's just gone around my mind that it looks just like it used to back in the day, with the dark wood. And you sit down at these tables, and the big old mirror that's seen better days, and then the waiters kind of fussing around, and you know that the little washroom there, if you can go somewhere else, you probably better go somewhere else, because it's still like it was back in the the 18th century or whatever. But it's so spacious, and they bring you the coffee and the hot chocolate and whatever you want to order, and it's just the ambiance, and sometimes we stop and we sit down. Sometimes you get people that can't walk very far, and so might stop, or it's raining or something, or it's just too hot, and we'll just sit down and have a break. So we just keep going, and until we get out to the Café Flore, the two famous literary cafes, Café Flore and Domingo, which is on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, and we bring back in James Baldwin, and we bring back in Richard Wright, but we bring in the existentialist writers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir. So we paint the whole picture of, this is not just African Americans came to Paris and they did this and this and this. This is what they parachuted into. This is what the situation, and this is how the French on the ground benefited from having the African Americans and turned the situation around for themselves, and used, what was going on in Black America to fill up the newspapers and all kinds of things. So it's a dance between the two cultures and has long been. So that's one of the tours. The other tour is up in the Montmartre district. So you go up towards the Moulin Rouge, the north end of the city, which is typically has traditionally been where the entertainment district is, because up behind the Moulin Rouge was kind of on the outskirts of the city. So there was no tax on liquor, so it was cheap, and so the cabarets were cheap. And so have you ever seen the film Moulin Rouge?
Yes.
Okay, so the kind of lifestyle that they had, the dancers weren't paid very well, and they were like courtesans and stuff. But and then in the back, you can walk around the streets, and some of it still feels kind of like that. So the kind of lifestyle that wasn't really great, but that's the quintessential French. That's what the romantic French that they're hanging on to. But then right down right across the boulevard was Black Paris, right? Black Montmartre, where in the 1920s, all of the jazz musicians lived and worked and played in the clubs there. So you have on the one side of the boulevard this very, very French, hardcore atmosphere. And then down the hill, you've got, free for all the foreigners, all the jazz. And the jazz was considered by these guys up the hill. Jazz is considered like decadent music. It's like it's very against everything that is French. So but then you have all the wealthy foreigners coming into this area, just south of there, because jazz made the area hop, right? It brought it back to life after the First World War. And so this is where the musicians found home. This is where they were paid a lot more than the French musicians, They lived really well. And then all the champagne that was flowing through there. And then you got, and so we walked through that area, and, I'll show you where Langston Hughes worked in the back of a club called a club called Le Grand Duke, which was run by an African American man the first Black aviator with the Foreign Legion. And then after the war, he opened this club, he ran the club, and then he brought Bricktop over, who was a well-known singer in the U.S. And while she's singing out in the front of this little teeny tiny club, in the back, there's a young fellow called Langston Hughes, who's just arrived in Paris, 1924, and he's washing dishes and listening to Bricktop in the front. And so you've got this community forming, around them. And it's just brilliant, because when you walk through the streets, it's not there anymore, but we hope you can feel it. And it's important to know that we had this history there, and that because we had this history there, the jazz hasn't become an international music. They made it into French music, but it's the influence of African American culture. Even if you can't see it, it's still there. So and it still exists to this day. So that's how beautiful the story is. It's just and it's so we do the two walking tours. We have a tour in the African district, which is just a couple blocks away. And we do a bus tour that links all of this together, because there's always people who can't necessarily walk the distance, but really, you're going to come this far. We want to see it all, right?
Right.
So we do bus tours as well. And that takes us out further, so we can see where Alexander Dumas statues are. And it's just ties. It's like a beautiful ribbon on the tour of the city. Yeah.
I'm smiling like cheesing, because
I see you
as
smiling.
you're telling a story, I am literally remembering the walk that I did with you. And like I said, I read all of their books. So I'm thinking about their books, and then I'm thinking about the tour that I did when I was in France. And I'm like, she's just saying this little street and this little. I'm like, no, this is big. Oh my gosh, I was so excited. And I'm having those same kind of emotions right now, just thinking about that, So what are some of the reactions you've gotten from some of the people that you've taken on tours?
Like
What
yours.
because we read the books, and then when we read those books, we mainly think about New York. We don't put them together with Paris,
No.
France. And so, yeah.
The reaction of people when I early on in the tours before there was internet, um, people I used you'd have journalists come and they'd write about it, and then people would show up with the article like in the New York in the Wall Street Journal or something, and they would be like really thrilled to be able to take the tour. So there was there's that sense of great anticipation that we're about to cross into another world, but not just it's the valorization of African American culture and Black culture outside of what we know, and that in a huge city like Paris, we made such a big difference. So there's the joy, there's the thrill, there's surprise, there's also discussion, especially when I take university groups. There is a sometimes challenging of the status of the stories that are told and the way it's being seen today. For example, like Josephine Baker's story, her story is so complicated and has so many levels to it, that when you look at it from today's lens, the questions are, why did she make those choices? Like, why, how did that work? And that kind of thing. So the conversation is perpetual. It's always going on. So I am, pleased to be able to be part of that conversation with people when they come on the tours, because I learn a lot from people when I talk and we have discussion. I encourage all kinds of discussion and questions and stuff.
Sure.
So, and often we do, like I said, university groups, but also, we've been doing a lot of alumni groups. So from the different various universities around the US, and they know their stuff, right? They know, so I've got to know my stuff, right? So, so we get some really, really interesting discussions going. Yeah.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
also have, what's really cool is that we have guides that are from different backgrounds. Like I'm Canadian with my background, but we have guides that have backgrounds from like mixed Russian and French, or African and Polish, and from Martinique and whoever. So they bring a whole nother perspective to the story. So the reaction to those people as our guides is that people get a chance to connect to the black culture abroad, right? And that's really important. So you have them in front of you. This is the time to ask the questions you really want to know. You don't want to read the article, you don't want to watch the webinar, nothing. Ask them the questions and
Yeah.
they're more than happy to answer. So what I really like the sense of is connecting across the borders, across the diaspora, how I pronounce it, diaspora. So that's what I really appreciate.
Good, good, good. So tell me, what are some of your favorite cafes? I know
Okay,
there's like, what is it, like 7,000
6
cafes?
million. I don't know. I don't even know the number.
I,
After this COVID thing, who knows how many there's going to
I
be remaining?
know.
But favorite cafes. It depends on on my mood. I really like to sit around Montparnasse area. The metro stop is Vavin, Vavin. There's La Coupole, which is there, which I love to sit out there. And then sometimes I will go across the street and have. I like the food at Le Select. I like how cozy it is, and the Select right across the street.
Hmm.
And then the Dome and all of these little La Rotunda. I like those areas around there. I like the one I mentioned before, La Palette. I like it for its ambiance. I like because I know, and some of my favorites are the ones because it has our histories attached to it.
Okay.
Like James Baldwin is attached to Le Select. Josephine Baker's is attached to La Coupole. James Baldwin's also attached to La Palette. So that those are some of my favorites. Um, let's see, where else do I like? Yeah, those are probably my favorites. Yeah, and there's a lot of little restaurants that I just Because of this COVID business, and I was supposed to be in France now. We were supposed to be doing week-long programs, and so we did these programs last year. So I know that on Monday we're eating at this restaurant, Tuesday we're eating at this restaurant, Wednesday we're at this restaurant, and I'm looking up and I'm going, gosh, I know because we do it every week. So I'm thinking I should be eating that creme brulee today. I should be having that, that special whatever sauce that is on this fish, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm so it just kind of wells up, it's like it's really kind of crazy sometimes.
I know. I was talking to a friend today, and I said, I'm having serious withdrawals.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Exactly.
But this is the first time I've not traveled for 7 years. I've traveled at least because I travel every year, at minimum 4 times a year, minimum. And so this year, I'm not going to be able to go anywhere.
Well,
it's the thought of that. I mean, I can probably stay in the States.
Yeah.
But when I talk about, I'm going out the country.
Okay.
That's what I mean. My last trip was October of 2019, and it was the best trip of my life. I went to North Africa.
Did you go to Morocco?
Yes, but I started in Egypt.
Oh, wow.
Everyone has to go to Egypt. I'm sorry. That has to be like, move that up your bucket list, put it on your bucket list.
Why?
I think it's like my experience when I went to Paris, France. Reading stuff in the book is one thing, but to go there and see, like, this is like the beginning of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
In the fact that these buildings, these artifacts, they're so old and they're still in great conditions, and then think about the connection that these artifacts have to how we operate today. And I learned, Cleopatra, I'm a fan, yes, but there was someone before her. And then when you go to these places, it's a connection, it's like a spiritual connection. At least for me, it was. And so I'm happy I had that trip. And I'm glad if that had to be my last trip for the next year, okay, that's wonderful. But I'm having some serious travel withdrawals.
So are you not going to travel in the US?
I will. I don't know how far I'll venture from home, because I'm brave, and I really believe in living my best life, but I also want to be safe and smart about the situation.
Right.
I want to be able to travel, but I don't want to travel and then be restricted to the places I can go, the activities I can do, or I have to quarantine myself for 14 days. I mean, I might just ride it out until it's a little safer, which probably looks like 2021.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a little safer to do some real traveling.
World travel, yep. I mean, there's you can't go to Europe now, even if you wanted to. You'd have to quarantine.
Exactly.
And but there are, it's for me, the way I look at it, is that it's an opportunity to get to know better around you. And yes, you have to feel safe. You said you're in New York, right?
No, I'm in DC. In
DC, okay. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a big city where it's been really hit hard, I would be really kind of a little leery, as they are. I know a lot of my friends, when they came out of what they call the confinement in France, they weren't just rushing out into the streets. They were just let's just see what happens here. Mm-hmm. So you're just a little bit leery, and then after a while you just start going out. But then there's some places all around you that you've never been to, or that you kind of dash through, like maybe even on your way to the airport or something. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, let me just stop and have a look and see what's going on, and there's businesses that really could welcome our patronage, and mm-hmm. and there's just that sense of, okay, I can't go anywhere far, but there's all this stuff around me. There's all this beauty. There's all these places that I've never really stopped and looked at, and where I am. Yeah,
I agree, and I am a person who take advantage of my surroundings. local events or local opportunities. Like I haven't been hiking in a while.
Mm.
So I may, do some hiking trips.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So and I enjoy walking. I know when I travel, I can walk. I think the longest walk I did was when I was in Egypt. I think I walked like 26 miles in a
what?
day. Yeah.
Ouch.
Oh, and I didn't feel it until that night. But because for me, when I travel, and I try to encourage this for my clients, walk. That's how you get to experience the
Yeah.
culture. That's how you
Hmm.
meet people. I've met so many people by just walking or using
Right.
their public transportation. And as I said earlier, I do enjoy all the touristy sightings, and events and activities and buildings. And when I went to Pisa, I went to the top of the Leaning Tower, because
Are you
I,
saying you walked up?
hmm,
Are you saying you walked up?
yes.
Mhm.
When I went to New York, I went to the top of the Statue of Liberty, walked up those stairs. You know,
Have you been to the CN Tower in Toronto?
yes, yes.
Did you walk up?
No, I think my son was young at that time. So I think we took the
Oh, I see. I
yeah,
got it.
stood on the glass floor. That was frightening.
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
my first job in tourism, working
Oh,
in the CN Tower.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I find that like as I said, that walking you really get a true experience of the destination. And I definitely enjoyed that. Well, I still enjoy that, and I'll probably be doing a lot of that here. Um, I'm lucky enough to live in a DMV, so there's always something to do. If you live in
Right.
the DMV area and you're bored, then that's a choice. Because even being shut in, there's lots to do in the DC, Maryland area. So I'm hoping to put together like some trips going out to the Shenandoah Valley. We can go out there and do the winery and
Right.
do some hiking, or the Billy Goat Trail right here in Virginia, um, Potomac, Maryland. Do some tours out there. That's a small hiking tour and stuff. So, or even when I went to Nevada, you go out there to do a lot of walking out there. So yeah, there are a lot of things to do in the States and stuff, but again, I don't want to venture out or
Right.
even and you can't do it because they've met their maximum number of people for the day or that
Right.
week or whatever. So planning trips for myself or even for any of my clients is going to take a lot of research and a lot of patience.
Yes, yes, it is, and that's what they like. I'm a travel agent too, and I'm not planning trips for people to Europe at the moment, but no, those are on
Mhm.
hold. But I'm planning trips for people around where I am,
Right,
and
right.
so yes, it's a different kind of planning, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
We really have to do a lot of work for ahead. We have to do a lot of checking and vetting be ahead of it,
exactly.
but it's a people want to travel, people want to get out of their house. They just want to drive on the road. Sometimes it's just great just to get in your car and move
Hmm.
after being cooped up. So it's a different type of trip that me too, different type of trip that I would normally be
Hmm.
planning, but it's interesting all the same. So
It
just to
is.
get to know it's around me, like you're in the States, and I know some of the States, but also around Canada as well.
Yeah. This weekend, I did. I walked across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and it's a walk I've done before. But when I got on the Virginia side, I noticed just diagonally across the street there was a cemetery. And my natural curiosity, let me go find out what's happening over
Right.
here. And it turned out to be a cemetery for 1,800 of African American slaves that
Wow.
escaped to Alexandria, Virginia. And they're buried right there, and it's called the Freedom Cemetery.
It's good to
Right
walk.
there.
Yep.
Yeah. On the other end of Woodrow, and I've done that walk a couple times before, but I never noticed it. But this time I did.
Right.
So, yeah. I really appreciate you. I'm checking my phone because I'm trying to see if there are any questions. That's what I've been looking down at and stuff. So I just want to see if there are any questions from the audience. And before we end this discussion, I really appreciate you stopping by and talking to us. So where can they find you? What is your website? What is your social media handle? Tell us.
Okay. Again, my company is Walking the Spirit Tours. So the website is www.walkthespirit.com. So that's a Facebook, and then there's that's a website. Then I'm on Facebook too under the business page is WTS, like Walking the Spirit Tours. But if you go to Julia Browne, which is me, Julia Browne with an E, you'll find it. But it's Walking the Spirit Tours on Facebook as well. I'm on Twitter a little bit less, at J Browne Paris, and I'm on LinkedIn. And I just started on Instagram, but I haven't quite got, it's just, I haven't quite got there. But that's where I am on social media. I put out a newsletter every 2 weeks or so, and mostly it's written, keeping people up to date on what's going on with this situation, but also keep people's spirits up, just to stay in touch, that kind of thing. So I do that through. You can find that on my website. The sign up form is right on the front page of the website, and from there you can download a book that's called "When's the Best Time to Go to Paris?" So you can apply for 2021. So yeah, that's about where I am.
Yeah, good. Well, I hope you and your family continue to be safe and healthy, and I hope I get to see you in the near future.
Yes, me too. Let me just say this. With our tours, we have a film that was made by my good friends, and it's called. This is it here. It's called. It's kind of backwards. I see it's backward. It says Paris Noir: African Americans in the City of Light. It's an hour documentary that chronicles from the First World War right through to the Second World War, and then into the 1950s. So along with that, there is I have a book somewhere. Oh yeah. I'll bring it up, the book that goes with it. It's a book that takes you all through it, and it's got some virtual reality components to it. So you can find that also, the link to that on our website, or AfricanAmericans.in.Paris.com. AfricanAmericans.in.Paris.com.
I'm definitely going to read it. I'm looking forward to it already.
So the film, you can stream it right from the website.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it's easy you can just watch it at home, do whatever.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Julia. I appreciate your time again, and hopefully I can get you on my next tour to Paris.
Thank you, Toni. I very much appreciate it, and travel agent to travel agent, we can work together, and your clients and my clients together.
Definitely, it's enough for all of us.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Thanks again, and thank you to your listeners. And don't hesitate to look us up. I should have said bonjour at the beginning, but here I'll say it at the end. Bonjour.
Yes.
Au revoir.
Yes. Okay. Well, bye for now.
Okay, take care, Toni. Bye.
Bye-bye.